Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking your time joining for us in the panel. I thought we will get together and have a I thought we will sort of have a discussion on Dockercon and the future of Docker, the company, and all those things. So first, I thought we will do an introduction, and then we will start with the three of the panelists who attended the event. One from the buyer side, one from more or less like a independent advisor kind of side, and another one from the partner side. So I think we will have wide, diverse set of opinions out there. So I think this will be a good discussion going forward. Okay, let's start introducing ourselves. Ben, why can't you start?
Sure. So my name's Ben Kepes. I'm a independent analyst and commentator and troublemaker, pretty much. I write for a bunch of different pubs, mainly Computer World and Network World, and I've been watching the space, the broader cloud space now for a decade, I guess.
Okay, Brandon.
Hi there, I'm Brandon Butler I'm a senior editor at Network World. I focus on covering the infrastructure service public cloud computing market, but watch a bunch of other trends as well. So happy to be here.
Lawrence.
I'm Lawrence. I do some research for a website called The New Stack, and I am a poser. So I'm looking forward to hearing about what everyone else has to say.
Kevin.
Hello, Kevin McGrath from SunGuard Availability Services. If you haven't heard of us, we pioneered recovery as a service many, many years ago. I work for the CTO group out of SunGuard AS, and I kind of look at the technology we need to be getting into sooner than later to stay relevant in the market.
Chris?
Yeah, my name is Chris Gaun. I'm at Apprenda, a vendor based in New York, who is a software vendor. We also have a lot of work that we do in the Kubernetes community.
Okay. Lee?
Hey guys, hey, Lee Calcote. I wear a number of hats, I guess is the way of stating it. My full-time hat is at SolarWinds, leading up technology strategy, so hopefully doing some innovative things there. But wear some other hats generally in the cloud native community, maybe that's the best way of saying it. So spend a lot of time with the CNCF, get to hang out with Lawrence occasionally, end up contributing to some things on Network World every rare occasion. Recently a Docker captain, CNCF ambassador, and just generally, maybe like Ben, end up trying to make myself a nuisance wherever I go. So.
Okay, and last but not least, a surprise guest for us, and he is Cloud Opinion. Cloud Opinion, are you there? Looks like he's still getting permission from the C Cloud. Let's get started. Kevin, Lee, and Chris, you three attended the conference. So what is your feeling? I know, Lee, you attended the previous Dockercon too. Chris, you attended the previous Dockercon. Kevin, I'm not sure if you attended the previous one. What is your feeling about the conference compared to the previous one? So do you think the developer momentum is still there? Do you think, did you see any enterprise customers? What do you think about the project going? What do you think about Docker, the company, going?
There's a lot going on in there in that question. Maybe I'll jump in and say, one, I was pleased to have Docker, this is my third Dockercon, but I was pleased to have Dockercon come local to Austin. So I could rest in my own bed at night. To some of the questions that you were asking, just one takeaway is that Dockercon, and actually one of the last OpenStack summits was here in Austin. Dockercon, in terms of attendee count and in terms of just the feeling around the conference, is really on the order of magnitude of that size of a conference. So just over the last couple of years, I think since 2014, there were about 500-ish attendees then, and we're looking at 5,500-ish now. So just, it filled out the Austin Convention Center venue. You mentioned a couple of things. I do still think that not only does Docker have the hearts and minds of developers, and but also in some respects is beginning to with operators as well, particularly as developers who've created either new projects have begun to make some infrastructure choices on behalf of the operator. The developers have begun to define what some of that infrastructure is, and so just with my SolarWinds hat on, I would say that we're recognizing that from some of our core customers as well, we've got a lot of different personas that we solve for, and software we offer up to historically has been IT professionals. And I think we're getting a lot of questions from them on how to monitor and how to manage in this space. So I think you've seen a bunch of Oracle and Microsoft airtime, if you will, up on the big stage. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
Yeah, this is also my third Dockercon, third US. I haven't been to any of the European ones, but I thought this one, just from personally, and sometimes it's the sessions that you hit and who you meet and everything else, I thought this Dockercon was much better than last year's. Last year's felt, first year was awesome. It was just like this groundswell of people who knew about Docker finally all got to get together. And it was very, very developer centric, and everyone was just saying like, hey, I'm using this cool, awesome thing. How do we go forward? I was still actually surprised to see how many enterprises were on board, even for that first Dockercon, just right out of the box. Going up to this Dockercon, I had, in sessions that I went to, I thought the demos and the digging deep into Docker and how to use it in an enterprise was much better this year than last year. Last year definitely felt kind of like a growing pains, if you will, of, if they're 3-4 years out of the box, right? You're going to have to figure out how to carve your space out. But they really started attacking the enterprise. And one of the biggest things that I try and read out is, the hallway conversations, or as I call them, my breakfast and lunch conversations. I always try and find a round table with people that I don't know and have conversations with them there. From the first to the third, I'm a little surprised that the conversation hasn't moved along as quickly as everyone thought it was going to. When it started out at, the first Dockercon, everyone was like, well, this is going to be the thing. Like next year, this is it. This is everything. But we're into the third one now, and there's a lot of people who are still putting their toes in the water. But I do talk to more and more people now. I actually hear stories. No, we have this in production. We're not quite necessarily using any schedulers yet. The people on stage are still probably most of the people who are really running hard with Kubernetes or Mesos or Swarm. But the hall room walkway conversations, people are starting to get into production with Docker, and people are starting to figure out how to use it in their CI/CD chains. So it's neat to see that progression through the three.
Yeah, this is my second Dockercon. I did not go 2 years ago. Last year, I thought it was probably one of the best conferences I was at that entire year. Rivaled the reInvent conference that I've been to every year. My understanding is that the year previous to that was a lot smaller, and that there was a big jump from that year to this year. I think most of the people I talked to last year, when they were looking around, they said, "Oh, this is like a real tech conference. This looks like it could grow into a VM world or something like that." There was growth this year. My understanding, it was a little over 30% larger. So the jumps between conference to conference were less than a reInvent, where I think it's like 60 to 80% larger every year, but there has been good growth. The traffic was down for our booth and for some of the other booths I talked to. That was probably just a logistics thing. Last year, the keynote, to get to the keynote, you actually had to go through all the vendor booths, which just drives traffic. This year, the only real reason to go into the vendor area was actually lunch and dinner, and people skip that and go out to restaurants. So the traffic, foot traffic was down. The scans were about the same quality. So lots of big enterprises as well as lots of startups, some smaller governments, and some universities. There were, as far as the enterprises go, like the Global 2000, it was pretty much the biggest of the big. We haven't seen, or at least in our scans, we didn't see real swell in the sort of bread and butter of like railroads and tractor makers and stuff like that. which you go to reInvent, you see pretty much everyone in the Global 2000 now. So that's my general opinion. I mean, that's a very vendor-centric perspective, but that's what I saw.
It's Lawrence. Rish, we can't hear you. But my question is, was there as much fighting between vendors and partners this year as there was last year?
Yeah, so go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I was going to say there wasn't much fighting between vendors last year. I mean, there was a little bit of ads, I think, on stage from Docker on some of the orchestration communities, but it's the enterprise. People compete. It's not like we're all best friends. So I didn't see any transition from. I think it was probably a little bit friendlier from that perspective of like embracing other orchestration tools, but it was pretty friendly both years. And honestly, one thing I didn't mention about last year is every corp dev from every large company, large IT vendor, and every VC was at the conference. It was the place to be as far as if you're in tech, if you're in enterprise tech. If you weren't at Dockercon, it's almost like, well, what conference did you go to?
The only thing I'd say there is that the risk of that is that the fact that every VC was there kind of reminds me of OpenStack 5 years ago, and we all know what happened with that. And for me the elephant in the room, clearly people are all on with containerization. Clearly people are all on with Docker the initiative. But my real question is this tension between Docker Inc. And Docker the initiative and what Docker Inc. is doing to its ecosystem, or arguably allegedly doing to its ecosystem, how it's going to justify its valuation, and the impacts of that upon the initiative. And that's kind of the big unknown for me. There's no question that Docker the project is a good thing, but I'm really concerned about the initiative, about the ecosystem, and Docker Inc.'s moves, to be honest.
Yeah, and unfortunately, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but unfortunately, that was the worst delivered message of the conference. When you get into the releasing of Moby, it's kind of hashed out afterwards of, hey, this is Moby, Docker's not going to change. We're going to have Docker as the company, and Moby's going to be this composable set of projects. But unfortunately, for your answer there, they didn't give. I don't think they delivered that well on stage or in the talks.
Yeah. Ben, I really want to pick your mind on that. You wrote that article about Docker having some systemic issues. So what made you think that there is a problem with Docker the company?
So I guess, it started right at the back, and I think it was kind of analogous to OpenStack. OpenStack, there was so much hype, there was so much VC money, there was, people were pouring their hearts and their wallets into it, and all of a sudden it kind of didn't meet the expectations. And that's not, OpenStack as a project is a really good thing. OpenStack as a business, and all the individual businesses maybe not so much. And it's kind of the same kind of deal. Docker started, massive attention, massive interest, massive funding at a massive valuation. And all of a sudden, the fact of the matter is that those VCs demand a return on that. Docker needs to, do another round of funding, and it needs to be at a higher valuation. And the only way that it can justify its valuation is by owning more and more of the value chain. The way it does that is by kind of eating its ecosystem. We've already seen, some things with that around some acquisitions it does. But if I was in peripheral areas within the Docker ecosystem, I'd be concerned, or I'd be anxious.
Okay. Yeah. Before we sort of dig a little bit on that, Brandon, from your vantage point, what is your take on Dockercon?
Well, in terms of this conference and sort of where it stands in the tech world, I think that it could be considered as sort of the container conference, and I think of sort of reInvent as the cloud conference. So I think Docker has a lot of interest and attention in that realm. In terms of sort of news coming out of the show, we had one of our bloggers at Network World write an article saying that the biggest news at Dockercon 2017 was no big news. That was from James Thomason, who is the CTO of Hypergrid. And I think his point was that the two major announcements that Docker did make were related to Moby, the Moby project, which sort of allows folks to sort of compose their own products and services around open source projects, and then also a Linux kit, which I think has some interesting things going along with it in terms of integrations with other platforms. And so I think those are interesting announcements, but I think there was a sense that people were expecting sort of a bigger sort of announcement and bigger push from Docker this year. So I'd be interested in getting other people's thoughts about the news from the show. Were you expecting more? What would you have liked to have seen Docker do, maybe that it didn't? Because I think that some people in the community sort of had that sense that they were hoping for more news from Docker.
Yeah, before we sort of jump and discuss about the news that came out, Lawrence, do you have anything to add to it?
No.
Okay, so sort of elaborating on what Brandon said and picking on what Ben talked about, the announcements that came out of Dockercon gave me a feeling that it's a more defensive kind of announcement than really leading the way. For Linux Kit is a sort of what do you say, a response to Red Hats of the world, CoreOS of the world, and Canonical and other players who are out there. And also it's a move that sort of makes Microsoft a little more friendly towards Docker. I think that's the way I look at Linux Kit announcement. And Moby project is again like Docker's way to sort of like push the community away from their product, so that they want to use the term Docker towards their product and towards their offering, and want to push the community away from that term. So again, these announcements are all like more defensive, and they really like gave me this feeling that Docker, the company, has confidence in sort of like going forward. And with their unicorn evaluation, there is going to be pressure. And these are all like moves that are sort of like supposed to make their VCs feel comfortable and probably give some confidence to enterprise buyer that, okay, you can trust Docker for your end-to-end offering. That's my take. Anyone who wants to offer their own take on the announcement, and probably either agree or refute to what Ben and Brandon said, you're welcome to do.
I think those are, I generally agree with those perspectives. Also, Ben was bringing up some tantalizing conversation there. I'll say that I did read that same contributor article on Network World, and I do think from a features and functionality perspective, like that's an entirely accurate article. That like it was of the functionality that was talked about on SwarmKit was underwhelming, and was in a lot of respects just kind of a repeat of what was at the prior Dockercon, or at least some things that were announced in experimental mode at prior Dockercon, and now are kind of fully supported out of the box. But arguably, and this maybe ties back to Ben's point, is that in some respects, the announcement of the Moby project is the most significant announcement that has come forward from Docker Inc. kind of from the beginning, just the ramifications of that, and kind of how it begins to separate the commercialization of their offering and their path to monetization versus community contributions. Yes, I think I think it's generally a good move for everyone involved. I think it does help provide some separation between Docker Inc. and Docker the project. It allows them a more clear path to monetization. It gives them, it probably helps ease some of the tensions between choices that Docker as a product need to make and build opinion into that offering in order to deliver a user experience that they think is a compelling value add for their customers versus, and they can do that if you kind of think of Moby in layers as, collection of various components up here that you can assemble into different project or product offerings. And kind of the further that you go down that funnel between Moby, the project, each of those assemblies, and you come out with Docker CE and then Docker EE, things can get more opinionated kind of as they go. I think that's also a way of kind of easing, like I said, easing some of that pressure between maybe where pull requests haven't been accepted in the past. Some of those now can be because you've got a separation of where some of those choices are made.
But is that an example of Docker Inc. moving to be to protect itself? You know, there's some concerns around sort of container image standards, and there's some risk for Docker given that, you know, CoreOS is essentially, you know, a Google subsidiary. Let's be honest, and you know, Google's kind of playing nicely right now, but Google's intentions towards Docker Inc. Going forward over the next 6 to 12 months are going to be super interesting. And so is Docker trying to protect itself, and is Moby kind of a way of sort of decompiling their offering so that they can kind of pick up one of the other pieces should CoreOS / Google you know, do something that damages the container image aspects of things?
So yeah, I mean, picking up on that, two things. I think it's exactly right. Docker is looking to monetize on packaging, and that can be seen both from Moby, and also, if you noticed beforehand, they started changing their versioning to more of an Ubuntu versioning number because they're a packaging system now, right? They package a bunch of components that have various versioning numbers. They all get packaged up into a nice monthly release, long-term support. You can kind of see where they're going with that. They're going to be a packaging company. They're going to package services together for you. They knew starting in Dockercon 1 that the Docker engine itself, you could not make money on that. It was, you know, it was putting together all the low-level stuff to get a container to run on the computer. It was great and developers loved it, but there's really no monetization there. The monetization comes in with custom packages, enterprise support packages, things like that. So Moby, I really like the idea that they're taking all these components and they're putting in the Moby project and they're making those open source, and they can kind of live their own lives. And then Docker is going to pull them into a package that, you know, you can have the community release, as you just said, or the enterprise release. And in the enterprise release, they can add pretty much anything they want into that, depending on the contract that they make with their customers. So I think as Docker was thinking about how are we going to monetize this was on their roadmap, but they had this spaghetti code to start out, had to start separating it all out, and Moby is the separation of that.
This is, I agree with you. Like, this is more or less like the Red Hat model, like what Red Hat tried with Linux by packaging it and trying to monetize that. Red Hat was successful because at that time they were the only company who were doing it and who understood open source and went ahead and they packaged it and they became successful. But now, like, there are too many companies who are competing in the space. Do you think the Red Hat model of packaging everything and adding the enterprise support will really stick in this competitive world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll stick for a lot of people. There's still a lot of, you talk about, you know, getting the whole Fortune 2000 base on board. And a lot of our customers at SunGard AS, we're a service provider. And so we deal with a lot of, you know, Fortune 200 to 2000 and, you know, on the edges of those. And yeah, people want support at different levels. They want enterprise license agreements. They want to make sure someone's responsible at the end of the day. They don't necessarily have the tech staffs to take open source all the way through to the end. So you're definitely going to lean on open source. You're going to use a ton of open source, but there's always going to be someone at the end of the day that you're also leaning on for support and someone to pick up the phone and yell at when things go wrong. I think it's about as good of a plan as any going forward. I don't know if there's an open source monetization strategy that I think has, you know, hands down won in the industry.
Yeah. That's what makes Docker's case interesting, especially with the unicorn evaluation. So Brenda has been in the open source space, like by packaging Kubernetes. So Chris, do you think Docker's strategy of following Red Hat in this model is going to work?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're pretty much a standard in containers right now. I mean, I would sort of dismiss that, you know, there's anything even closely close to Docker as far as mindshare goes on the container front. So, you know, it's their space to play with, almost their market to build as themselves. So I do think that, you know, it can work.
Okay. So Brandon or Lawrence, do you have any take on this?
My take is that people are not going to want to pay for support per container. That's obvious, I think. The second take I have is that I think that Docker's given up on trying to monetize on the orchestration aspect of things. I think they're going to cede that to Kubernetes. And my big question coming out of this was that this is last year they announced Docker Store. This year, Docker Store seems to be a viable, something that someone actually could buy something from. And is that going to be the way forward for monetization? Because I think that's where you can buy packages of software.
True, but there the margins are going to be much lower for Docker, right? The ISVs are going to make the significant part of the money, but App Store, unless it goes at scale, there's not much for Docker, the Inc. say, especially when you compare that with the valuation they have. It might be peanuts. I'm just
I think it's
thinking
kind of
out
like
loud.
the AWS store, right? It gives you a taste. It gets you in the door. It is low margin, but then if you get hooked, then you ask for more, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if it ever gets like to like iTunes or something like that, where you just go in and buy stuff. I don't know if it ever gets there, but it definitely is a way for people to break down the barrier quicker.
Yeah, Brandon, do you have any question before I introduce our new guest to the audience?
Yeah, maybe just real quick. I think this sort of commentary that we were expecting more from Docker at this conference. I'm wondering sort of what more they could have talked about that would have sort of satisfied some of those concerns from folks. And it seems like maybe going higher up the orchestration stack is one area where they could have maybe made some additional news. They do have their Swarm product and offering. And it seems like higher up in that orchestration stack, though, it seems like Kubernetes has a lot of mind share and a lot of interest in it. So I guess I was surprised that there wasn't more talk about advancing Swarm or sort of as a comparison to Kubernetes. But then I sort of take a step back and think and think about how we are still very early on in container adoption and use cases, and they sort of have time to advance that message. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out into the future.
It was pretty interesting. I read an interview today where Ben Golub, CEO of Docker, was kind of, there was a bit of smack talk about Kubernetes, and it was kind of like, yeah, hey, if our sales rep is in an organization and they're trying to use Kubernetes to do their orchestration, we just leave and we go back in 5 months because no one can do Kubernetes anyway. And yeah, that feels like a very defensive piece of posturing. So I think that's a prelude to Swarm being to kind of basically a no holds barred war between essentially Google and Docker, and I know who I would bet on in that case.
Yeah. In fact, knowing all the things that happen in the community, I would say like Kubernetes did take the gas out of Docker, and that is putting Docker on the defensive. And we have another guest joining us, and for the first time, we are going to get this audio out to the people out there. So let's welcome Cloud Opinion to the show. And Cloud Opinion, can you quickly introduce yourself and answer the question about the future of Docker before we discuss the rest of the things related to enterprise Kubernetes and other stuff? I guess he is still stuck with discussing with the C Cloud. Okay, are you there?
No, I just wanted to. Can I say something on Brandon's question on
sure.
what they've announced?
Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead. Yeah.
You got to remember that they have a great go-to-market with both Microsoft and IBM. As I understand it, you can get Swarm in both those clouds, which is nothing to sneeze at. That's for their stage, and that's just awesome to have. But I don't think anybody knows exactly what they should announce, where everybody would say, "Oh yeah, that's exactly how they're going to make money." But everybody was looking for that type of announcement. They could do like something with the Kubernetes space. Like that would have been something where I think would have been surprising to all of us, and then everybody else in the Kubernetes community would say, "Well, Docker could own all of this because they have some of the mind share around the containers." So that's something where if they announced something like that, it would have been very surprising, and we all would have been discussing it today.
Can you speak a little bit on that particular thing, Chris? Like, yeah, they could do something with the Kubernetes space, but that means they are saying that Docker Swarm is not working, and all their Docker did.
No. I think when you go back to the article that was in the Wall Street Journal with the CTO or CIO of Goldman Sachs, where he's speaking about the two different use cases of Swarm and Kubernetes and how they're using them within the enterprise. One is in the data center and one is for developers to have orchestration in smaller clusters. They could have taken an approach like that. They could have said, well, we're a large vendor, so just like we have many tools that we sell, we're just adding one to these many tools because some people are building Swarm apps and some people are building Kubernetes apps. I don't think it's a winner take all. When you actually look at this space and the orchestration space, people talk a lot about like containers as a service and building a container as a service for all these developer groups. But the number one use case is actually just small teams of developers moving single applications to either Kubernetes or Swarm or Mesos and Marathon. It is not, an enterprise-wide endeavor. So to have just two different tools where they could sell them and just, admit that people are going to use Kubernetes, that I don't think that's something that would have said that Swarm is not something that doesn't work.
Okay, then yeah, go ahead, Lee.
Oh, sorry, Krishna. I think Chris is right. As a matter of fact, I've given a lot of talks on this particular subject, characterizing and contrasting container orchestrators between the 4 open source projects that are arguably the most popular. And I'm trying to stop because I think I had like a container orchestration tattoo on my forehead at one point. And the thing is like, at least for me, I feel like yes, absolutely, the fires were ablaze and there was a massive war going on, and it was a little bit uncomfortable for someone like myself who is an ambassador of both sides and really spends a lot of time kind of between the Docker ecosystem and the CNCF/Kubernetes ecosystem. I feel like at least on the surface and sort of publicly, I feel like a lot of those, some of those statements have been tamed. And yes, maybe it's true to to Lawrence's point, like to the extent that Docker isn't necessarily trying to monetize on Swarm. I guess it's an open question, but I think I feel like heck, Kubernetes was up on main stage this last week. There is, to Chris's point, it's not a zero-sum game. You've got different tools for different jobs. Thank goodness you don't just have a hammer. Thank goodness that you've got different levels of expertise and maturity and skill sets within your environment. You've got different applications that need different types of handling. You've got, don't underestimate the other 80%, 70% of the world who's yet to really come to containers full force. When they do, more often than not, they're going to come to Docker first as an engine. And as they go into a multi-host environment, they're going to enable Swarm in the 2 commands that it takes to do that. Their first taste will be on Swarm more often than not. And many of their use cases and much of their maturity levels and skill sets and needs aren't going to go past what Swarm is going to offer them, particularly by the time that they get there. I'm not saying that Kubernetes, I've talked a lot on this subject. Go harass me online about the evaluations that I've done. It's very clear Kubernetes is just the level of expertise there, what Google and Red Hat and CoreOS and many others, and Apprenda and others that are prominent in that space have been bringing in terms of experience, and the number of contributors and all of the people rolling off of OpenStack and trying to roll into this new world, just a massive movement there. It's all of that. Those are all true and factual statements. But I guess my point is, don't discount the rest of the world who, to someone else's point, I forget who just said, are like relatively slow in their journey. Like it takes a long time for people to up and change and do stuff, even though they technically can lift and shift into containers. It still takes them a long time. So don't count out Swarm.
Yeah.
So Lee.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. You mentioned OpenStack. My theory is that cloud infrastructure services and applications are moving much faster to being containerized and to being a need for orchestration. So it seems like, as you probably noticed, no one cares about OpenStack anymore. People didn't care. Even OpenStack's conference is about Kubernetes. So what I think is that adoption of containers and Kubernetes as orchestrator is full blown towards cloud infrastructure. But you were talking about the other types of developers and applications. And that's where it's much slower because, like what Chris was saying, is you're only doing it when you have to create a new application. And then that's what, or you have a specific use case, and that's when you start using the containers. I mean, yes, sometimes your CIO is pushing you to lift and shift, but that's a different situation. And just one other quick thing, Kevin, you were saying that there hasn't been a lot of movement in terms of adoption from one year to another. And I would say that I've seen that in data. I spend all my time looking at different surveys. And from 2015 to 2016, there was a huge jump between people who were interested and people actually piloting. In between 16 and 17, there's been a significant increase in people who are using orchestrators. So I think somewhere I saw a survey saying like 40% of people who were using containers were using an orchestrator to some extent, or at least had experimented with it, that's that movement there. My concern or interest is about the fact that maybe for those developers who are just developing simple end user applications, that they're going to jump over containers and go to try using functions as a service. Why should they care so much about containers when containers are not hot and exciting anymore? And using a containerized infrastructure, you could use functions as a service. And for a lot of these things, if you have to refactor things, why not just go to the shiny new object?
So a couple things there, and I mean, I agree with you on the data. It's kind of like we're now the fastest growing car company. Well, you're new, so you're going to jump by 50. If you don't jump by 50% in a year, you got to jump by 50% in a year. The adoption rate is always going to, the numbers are always going to be really big in the beginning. And and this said, I love Kubernetes. I think Kubernetes is great, and I've tried to implement it where we are and talk about it with some potential customers and stuff. But it really is an adoption process. And I think schedulers and the instant containers came out, we went right to cloud native. And then we had to do all the cloud native things all at once. And there's a lot of mid-range enterprises, and this might be the scope that I live in, in the mid-range enterprise space, where people aren't necessarily, they would love to do that. They agree that is the end game. Like, we would love to do that thing. They don't necessarily have the resources or feel comfortable with the technology right now to do it. What they do feel comfortable with are containers. And I think containers are a huge win for CI/CD. One of the things I tell everybody is start using containers today. If you have code, take that code, put it in a container, get it past, whoever you have to get through with security and ops to get that footprint on your server, run the Docker engine, and get these artifacts going in production. I think there's a much bigger win for companies that haven't necessarily even embraced full cloud yet, to get into containers and get artifacts rolling through a real CI/CD process. I think once you're in a real CI/CD process, then scheduling can become a really big deal. Instead of the trend is going there, but for real large scale adoption, I think people need to be introduced to containers first and scheduling second, personally. And I think Ben was actually getting to that on day 2 of his talk when he was talking about, hey, we can take your app, we can get it into a container. It's better here. Why is it better here? Well, it's portable now. You can see it better. You can move all its dependencies better. This is how we move along the path. I think going too fast, I'm at Serverless Conf right now. That's why I'm in a conference room. I'm back in Austin, and I'm going to Serverless Conf. And I think serverless is awesome too. And we do a lot of Lambda and we do a lot of serverless on my team. I think that's even another step out, especially for compliance, security, and a whole bunch of other reasons that, are you going to the cloud? Is it on-prem? Where is it running? There's a lot to answer. It's going to be answered, but there's a runway. I need to do something now. What's the runway before something's compliant? So I think you have a long runway with all of these things when it comes to enterprises, because enterprises don't normally jump full in the deep end for all of this stuff right away. And really the mass of this stuff has just started 3 years ago. And really it's a big paradigm shift for a lot of people out there writing code in the enterprise space. So I think it's going to take a little time to move on. I think we're all trending in that direction though.
I agree. And also, I agree with you completely that Docker has completely changed the CI/CD process, and that's going to make it more appealing for the enterprises.
Yeah.
Anyone else wants to add to it before we go to the next question? Okay, so my next question to you folks is like, what was missing from Docker's enterprise arsenal or strategy? Like, whether from a technology point of view or from a business strategy point of view, what is actually missing from on the Docker, the company side? Who wants to take this?
So is the question, what was missing from a Docker corporate?
What is missing on the Docker strategy, whether it's technology or whether it's the business side of things? What is actually missing in getting enterprises to adopt Docker platform in mass? Or like, what will make Docker, the company, be equivalent to Pivotal for the Docker platform?
Actually, when they're selling something that's valuable that people can't get elsewhere, that isn't free. You know, it's a business thing at the end of the day. You know, an open source initiative is fantastic and all, but open source is free in air quotes. Docker hasn't yet worked out what is the long-term monetizable, scalable, replicable, sustainable thing that it is, and Pivotal to some extent has.
I think if you were to ask me, like, what more can Docker do? I think that there's two things come to my mind. One is partnerships, and the other is success stories of enterprises using it and paying for their use of it. I think that there's obviously a lot of people who are interested in Docker and using it, but the more slides you can show of paying enterprise customers and share with the press of folks willing to talk about their use of it, and then also having these partnerships with companies that enterprises are already working with. I think those are two important things that Docker is obviously doing now, but it would be great for them to continue to do into the future.
Yeah, I agree. I think showcasing more enterprise customers will give confidence. That's something which I thought was missing in this Dockercon, or in general, Docker's interaction with the analysts and media. That they are not putting us in front of their customers and letting us talk to them. I think that's missing. So they have to do that. Yeah. From a technology point of view, do you guys think there is something else they could do that will make Docker a platform much more attractive to enterprises?
I don't know from a technology perspective, but I guess it kind of goes with that. You'd like to see maybe some numbers around Docker Cloud and Docker Data Center. They always announce them on stage. I don't know if I missed it, but you never really see any real either adoption or revenue numbers behind them. So it's kind of like, in the cloud space, everyone hid their cloud numbers for a while until AWS came out, or until Amazon came out and said, here are AWS numbers, we're pulling back the curtain. Mm-hmm. From a corporate perspective, when Docker actually says, oh, we're comfortable with pulling back the curtain and we're going to show you our numbers. And I think those are two great tools that they have right now that if the numbers were good, they could pull it back on, would be Docker Cloud and Docker Data Center, because those are revenue generating products from Docker. Whereas I think they're...
No. Docker Cloud is not a revenue generating product.
Lisa, it's revenue. It's not maybe not profit, but you pay for it.
Well, I mean, basically,
it's a commercial product. That's what Kevin is saying.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that when I was talking to somebody, forgot a few months ago about Docker Cloud, basically it was just meant to be a feeder into Docker Data Center. So that's one thing. Number two is Docker Data Center is not even prominent on their website. So how are they actually selling it? That's not even what they're focused on pushing. And just as an aside, I was looking at a recent small survey from Encore, which is a security company. Basically, I think it was 15% of people who are using Docker had an experience using Docker Data Center. Docker Enterprise. So if it's 10 to 15% adoption rate so far, that's not that bad. So, I mean, that's a metric that we could look at in terms of adoption of Docker Enterprise. Who cares how much money they're making from it? The people who are using Docker Enterprise are paying customers so that you expand the wallet share over time, but you know they're going to be paying people. So that's the metric that I would look at going forward.
I think this question is for Chris. Chris, your company is in the Kubernetes camp for a significant part. So Docker's approach to enterprises, Docker container is the critical role, but orchestration you could do whatever. It's not significant. For Kubernetes, I don't care what container it is, and in fact, Cloud Foundry also shares that they're sort of thinking to some extent. I don't care what the container is. Orchestration is the standard. Container encapsulation is not going to be the standard. So where do you think the industry heading? Do you expect the standardization to go around containers, or do you expect the standardization to go at the orchestration plane, or what do you think?
Yeah, so that's correct. Just to back up a little bit. So in Kubernetes, what you're actually scheduling, what you're actually scaling is something called a pod, which is one or more containers, and it somewhat abstracts the details of the container. So you don't actually hand Kubernetes like a running container. You point it to an image, or you give it a YAML file with the image source in it. So that's the difference. And you're not like port wrangling containers. You're not doing like a Docker compose for the containers. When you're actually running them in the data center at scale, you're going to need something like a Kubernetes or one of its competitors. But I don't think that means that there's not going to be other tools because not everybody's a data center, not everybody's.
But what about from the standardization point of view? Like when you think of Docker, you think about the portability, and if there is a lock-in with the orchestration, then that hinders portability. So like Kubernetes says, hey, we will standardize around Kubernetes. So we don't care about the container format, but that gives you much better portability than getting the portability at the container level. So two different schools of thought, in my opinion. So which school of thought is going to make more sense for the enterprise? And Kevin, after Chris, you can also jump in and add to it, but just trying to make it a little more interesting.
I'm not sure which adds more portability or not. I don't think, I truly don't think that one is a better standard as far as portability goes than another, whether you're just using pure containers or for the orchestration. I mean, there is an entire ecosystem of Kubernetes vendors, including different public clouds like Azure, IBM, and of course Google, and probably more on the way. And then other companies involved in Kubernetes space, a whole host of them, your former employer Red Hat, CoreOS, Apprenda, and so on and so forth. So there's definitely portability in the sense that the APIs for Kubernetes will be the same from vendor to vendor. But I mean, that was the argument for OpenStack for years and years and years, and that didn't sway anybody to start using OpenStack. So I'd have to think about that for a while.
Okay. So Kevin, do you have any thoughts before we go to the wrapping up?
Yeah, I think for enterprises, opinions are good. People want the new technology. They also kind of want to be told that this is all going to work together. Enterprises, I differ a little bit here. A lot of enterprises are afraid of lock-in, which was OpenStack was trying to get rid of, right? And that's Kubernetes is kind of going down that same road. My opinion is it's just what level of lock-in that you're comfortable with, because you're going to get locked in at a certain level. You're either locked in at the infrastructure or the API level, or how you call stuff or how you configure stuff. You just need to be happy with the lock-in that you have. But I think opinionated architectures are good because you know what to expect. So Docker has that to their advantage, because as they're developing their systems, they can dictate what it's going to be. Kind of like, I know we keep making the comparison to AWS, but AWS, they kind of dictate how the platform is going to run, and it works very, very well that way. Kubernetes, I would love to see Kubernetes thrive and not make the same mistakes that maybe OpenStack did, where, one of my opinions is you have so many cooks in the kitchen at the top that you just kind of get this sprawl that never really ends up hooking together. I think they're off to a much better start than OpenStack, but time will tell with, all the different foundations, how they come together and, how that works out.
Okay, anyone wants to add to it quickly before we go to the wrapping up question? Okay, I think we are coming closer to the end of the hour, and probably we should wrap up. So from now to the next DockerCon in US next year, what do you expect from Docker, the company, from the community? So if you can summarize it within 30 seconds about your expectations. Probably if the company listens to this podcast, probably they will sort of fine-tune their strategy to go with it.
Yeah, I mean, I could start if you want me. I'd like to see growth in the conference, that 30%, but hopefully 60, 80% growth in the conference. More diversity in the user groups or the users of Docker. So not just the first adopters like the big banks and the Visas of the world, but more of the bread and butter companies like that, are still using mainframes. I definitely want to see that. And then as far as announcements will go, something where everybody points to and says, yeah, that's definitely a moneymaker for them.
Who's going next?
Yeah, what the hell, I'll go. So my advice, if I was talking to Ben, they don't talk to me anymore, but anyway, would be, I understand that you guys are under pressure, but enough of the sensitivity already. Just grow up, act like a mature organization, engage with people, take a bit of criticism, listen to people, look at the analogs out there that have been successful previously, and execute.
Okay, Brandon. Brandon, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, I reiterate what I said earlier about more enterprise end users and more partnerships.
Lawrence?
I'm not holding my breath for enterprise partners, enterprise end users. I'm sure that'll happen, but that's not what I'm expecting. I'm expecting more activity with using Docker with other form factors and other types of applications. So Raspberry Pi, using it more with Windows. I mean, I would have thought that Microsoft would have bought Docker by now. So I don't know if you should really listen to me, because that would have been my prediction last year.
Lee?
Yeah, I'll echo a couple of those things. On the technology front, I would expect that there's going to be some tooling and some moves to facilitate adoption and the adoption towards mainstream, towards some of those masses that just need things like an out-of-the-box UI for the container engine. I would expect that would be there before long. I expect there's going to be some tooling around troubleshooting of networking in the container space. It's just as complicated as it has been in physical and virtual networking. I expect that, to Lawrence's point, I think it was Lawrence, that Linux Kit is a gateway towards unikernel type things. Linux Kit is capable of producing custom OS images that have a lot of characteristics of unikernels already, save that they're not restricted to a single user, single process space. So I think there are some good things to come out of Linux Kit in that regard. Maybe we'll see unikernels kind of take off because Linux Kit is going to help validate that space. On the softer side of the company, so Docker with every Dockercon, somebody gets squashed in the ecosystem. It's like a hell of a mind-boggling chess maneuvering strategy thing, I'm sure, for those guys. Everybody wants a piece, and no matter which way they turn, they step on somebody. Somebody's tried to fill a gap, and so I don't know that I don't know. Anyway, they've got to make some decisions for themselves. I mean, one of those is that they don't necessarily have a strong professional services group today. And so they're looking to partners to do that. And that's probably, the right move, because those partners have got all the existing processes and channels and relationships to do that. So the announcement of MTA, the modern, I forget modernization of traditional applications, and the partnership with some of those prominent consulting organizations. I guess my hope for them would be that would just, more success stories would come through, more quickly through those partnerships.
Kevin?
Yeah, I definitely want to hear some more mid-range enterprises again. That should come just with more adoption, but you definitely want to hear, where is their big win with their money? Are they going to, Lee just got into, they're kind of like AWS, they're kind of stomping out some people in their ecosystem, but Microsoft's kind of claim to fame is partnerships in the middle. So is this packaging going to start becoming packaging of a Docker release that you can buy with maybe Oracle already in it, or IBM already in it, Microsoft already in it, or is everything going to be Docker? Are they going to squash out the ecosystem or embrace the ecosystem? I think Moby is a really, really interesting way for them to go, and how they actually start using this packaging system between this year and next, and whether you feel comfortable with what they're inserting in the packages in the paid for enterprise Docker that you can buy. I think that's going to be maybe the biggest interesting thing over the next year. And then next year, yeah, I'd love to see, Docker actually start releasing, this is how people are generating revenue with Docker, because that's what enterprises really want to know.
Okay. So quickly, in my case, like I expect them to release some developer-centric tools so that they compete with cloud foundries of the world than competing with Kubernetes. And I also, like Brandon said, I would like to see some enterprise use cases so that I and other enterprises get some confidence on it. Okay, thanks, guys. It was a great discussion, and I think we should do again after Dockercon next year. This was good, and thanks, Kevin, for changing your travel to accommodate this, and thanks for everybody else for your time. And thanks for the thanks to the viewers. We'll come back with the next one pretty soon. Thank you.